believe I don't see Chair Allen, so I'll hand it off to Vice Chair Sebeski to start the meeting.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Pam Sebeski. I'm the first Vice Chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I call the TPB's February 17th, 2021 meeting to order. As we continue meeting virtually during the pandemic, we will continue to live stream the audio on video of this meeting on the internet and on YouTube. I hope we will be able to meet in person this year. I really am missing seeing everyone's lovely faces. While you are all familiar with our process for these virtual meetings, as we've had many, for the benefit of those watching us online for the first time, I will briefly review the procedures we will be following during this virtual meeting. First, I will ask Lynn to take a roll call of members or alternates to document your presence at this meeting and determine that we have a quorum. Then, for agenda items, I will have the presenter complete the briefing, then invite questions from members in turn by jurisdiction. For the action items on the agenda, once the presenter has completed the briefing, I will invite one of you to make a motion to adopt the resolution, followed by a second motion made. I will then invite questions from members by jurisdictions at the end of the discussion. I will call for a vote by jurisdiction. I will ask for the nay votes or abstentions. The rest of the votes from those present will be assumed as yes votes. Lastly, as a friendly reminder to please mute your microphones always, and importantly, to unmute your mic and state your name, jurisdiction when you do speak. But keeping your mics muted will help with background noise to make sure that we're being able to hear and understand our presenters. Lynn, if you would please take the roll.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to start by stating the name of the jurisdiction or the department, and then if you could state your name, we'll record your presence. If I go too fast or it's difficult to mute quick enough, don't worry, we're keeping an eye on the participant list. You can also feel free to write in the chat or just send me an email, but we'll be monitoring it the whole time. So I'm going to start with the District Department of Transportation.
Mark Rawlings is present.
Thanks, Mark. The District Office of Planning.
Kristen Calkins is here.
Good. Well, I was going to say good morning, but it's good afternoon, Kristen. District City Council, Ms. Pinto. Just so you all know, I got an email that she may be a little bit late, but should be joining us. District Council Charles Allen was also going to be late, but should be joining us. And then lastly, District City Council, Ms. Henderson.
I'm here.
Thank you. All right, on to Maryland. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Earl Lewis is here. Good morning, Lynn.
Thanks, Earl.
Afternoon now, afternoon.
Oh, yeah, right, I know. City of Bowie. Charles County.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Saw you. College Park.
Patrick Wynn, Mayor of College Park, present.
Thank you. Frederick County.
Kai Hagan, County Council at Large. I'm here, and I think Mark is as well. Mark, are you here?
Yep, Mark Mishler here as well.
Great, thank you. Gotcha. City of Frederick.
Billy Russell, present.
Hello. City of Gaithersburg.
Neil Harris is here.
Hello. City of Greenbelt.
Emmett Jordan is here.
Hello. City of Laurel. Montgomery County Executive.
Gary Ellenridge is here.
Hi, Gary. Montgomery County Legislative.
Councilmember Evan Glass is here.
Thank you. Georges County Executive.
Terry Bellamy here.
Thank you. Prince George County Legislative.
Hi, County Councilwoman Denny Taveras, present. Thank you.
Thank you. City of Rockville.
Mayor Bridget Donald Newton is present.
Thank you. City of Tacoma Park.
Hello, Casey Kostick is here.
Hello. Maryland Senate, I have vacant positions still. We haven't received any new information on that, so I'll go to the Maryland House of Delegates. Okay, I'll keep an eye out. Moving on to Virginia, Virginia Department of Transportation.
I'm here, Lynn.
Hi, Maria. Thank you. City of Alexandria.
Kenneth, present.
Thanks. Arlington County.
Christian Dorsey is happy to be here.
Thank you. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County Legislative.
Walter Alcorn's here.
And James Walker-Johnson.
And I also, is Mr. Lusk here too? I also thought I saw him in earlier, but I can keep an eye out.
Rodney Lusk is also here.
Okay, great.
Interrupting with both of my colleagues. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Thank you. Welcome. City of Falls Church.
Dave Snyder, very happy to be here.
Who's the happiest? That's what I should be asking, right? Fauquier County. Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstadt is here and extremely happy, Lynn.
Thank you. Loudoun County, sorry?
Bob Brown is here.
Thanks, Bob. City of Manassas.
Pam Sebesky is here.
Thank you. Manassas Park.
Mayor Jeanette Rischel is here.
Thank you. Prince William County.
Ann Wheeler is here.
And Victor Anger is here, and I'm going to be angry for the rest of my life.
Okay, you guys are making it hard for me. All right, so moving on. So we still have vacancies from the Virginia Senate and from the Virginia House of Delegates. So WMATA is next. WMATA.
Hi there, this is Sean from WMATA.
Hey, Sean. All right, our ex officio members, anyone from Federal Highway Administration? Federal Transit Administration?
Dan Koenig with FTA is here.
Thanks, Dan. National Capital Planning Commission? I'll keep an eye out for Julia. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority? And lastly, National Park Service.
Tammy Stidham is here.
Thanks, Tammy. All right, so that concludes our roll call. We do have a quorum. Back to you, Chair Sebesky. But before I throw it back, I want to welcome Leo Pineda. So Sergio has been spearheading all of our meetings for the board, and we're training Leo into it. Today is his first go round, so just want to ask for some patience, and we'll give him a round of applause at the end. So anyway, back to you, Ms. Sebesky.
Yes, and this is my first time chairing, so lots of firsts today, and hopefully everyone can be patient with everybody. So moving on until Chair Allen joins us, I will continue along with the meeting. My understanding is that there are no public comments, which is our next agenda item. So let's move on to approval of the minutes. I invite a motion to adopt the minutes of our December 16th meeting. Please state your name and jurisdiction as you make the motion.
Bridget Donald Newton, City of Rockville.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Kelly Russell, City of Frederick.
Great. Any corrections or comments on the meeting minutes? For the vote then, remember to restate your name and jurisdiction. Any absentees or nays from the District of Columbia? From Maryland? Any abstentions or nays from Virginia? From WMATA or other federal agencies? So I believe the minutes are approved then. Let's move on to the technical committee report. We have a written summary of our technical committee from February the 5th meeting. Our chair of the technical committee, Jason Groth, will brief us next.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Again, Jason Groth, and this year's chair of the technical committee. You can see in your mail out packets that we were briefed on 3 of the items that we're covering here today. And I won't go into any detail on those. Other items that we were briefed on that might be of interest was COGS 2030 Climate and Energy Action Plan. Had several climate action items and resiliency items that we covered specific to the transportation sector that might be of interest. I encourage you to take a look at those when you get an opportunity. But essentially those were the 2030 Climate and Energy Action Plan, the Climate Change Mitigation Study of 2021 for TPB, the resilience study that TPB is currently going through, and many of you may have received questionnaires on, and then the enhanced mobility COVID impacts. So that in particular, we were on the impacts of COVID-19 and its impacts on enhanced mobility grant projects and the innovative responses that have been taken to meet the needs of those with disabilities in our community during the pandemic. A lot of discussion on that, but I'll keep this brief, so I'll just turn it back to Madam Chair. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So let's start with the District of Columbia. Any questions for Mr. Groth or Conti? How about from Maryland? Okay, with Virginia? MATA or other agencies? Okay, then I guess everyone's good with that. Thank you very much, Jason. I guess we'll move on to item number 4, Community Advisory Committee and Access for All Committee report. Now we will receive reports from 2 other committees. Getting us started is Elsa Walton, the new chair of our Community Advisory Committee, who had their first meeting last Thursday. Elsa, we look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Elisa Walton. I'm the CAC chair, and as the chair mentioned, we had our first meeting last Thursday, February 11th. This was the first meeting for the 2021-2022 CAC. We used the meeting to share priorities for the 2-year term, do orientation activities, and we also had a briefing on the regional travel survey and discuss the year ahead with Chair Allen. Some of the priorities that committee members mentioned as key to their time on the CAC included a strong focus on equity, safety, sustainability, technology, and incorporation of the aspirational initiatives, among other priorities. In the discussion about the year ahead with Charles Allen, the TPB chair, he greeted the committee and thanked everyone for our service. He discussed the importance of regionalism and shared his vision and goals for the TPB in the year ahead. And he encouraged the committee to think more about how the region can respond to the COVID-19 pandemic by becoming stronger, more equitable, and more resilient, and looking for opportunities for federal investment in the region's recovery. He emphasized that fare increases and service cuts as a method to respond to the pandemic impact those who can least afford it, and also emphasized the importance of transportation given its link to health, jobs, and education. He called upon the CAC to use our experiences to advise elected officials, and the committee had questions and comments for Chair Allen about infrastructure priorities in upcoming projects, in particular the balance between different modes of transportation, as well as strong interest in the pandemic recovery and some of the comments around that. We had an update on the regional travel survey from Dr. Ken Joe, the TPB transportation planner, who briefed the committee on the purpose and scope of the survey and shared changes in reported travel between 2007-2008 and 2017-2018. The committee had several questions about how the survey was conducted, in particular around methodology around getting responses from hard to reach groups, and some questions about what types of trips are counted and how that impacts the results that we were seeing. So a lot of interest in the details of that. In other business, Brian Hayes announced a joint Access for All CAC focus group for Visualize 2045 and encouraged the group's participation. And he also answered questions from committee members as part of the orientation procedure. Kanti Srikant shared his personal experience with the TPB and described the CAC's role advising the board. So he offered some of us his views on how that relationship works and how we can best serve in our roles on the CAC. And Lynn Erickson walked the committee through the February TPB agenda. Finally, the committee posed for a group picture with Chair Allen, which you see, I think, on your screens now. We did that despite it being a virtual meeting, so continued that tradition. And generally, it was an opportunity for us all to start to get to know each other, start to share priorities, and look forward to what we want to accomplish in this year and the 2 years of our terms. So that really sums up the meeting. We're looking forward to working with all of you and supporting you through our role on the CAC, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, Chair Allen has joined us, so I'm going to turn the meeting over to him.
Thank you so much, Pam. And first, let me honking horn outside. Thank you, everybody, for your flexibility and patience there. I had another commitment I was racing back from, so thank you very much. Elisa, thank you very much for the report out. Any questions for our CAC?
This is Casey Kostick from Tacoma Park. I just want to thank you and also say I'm really excited to hear that the CAC and the AFA are planning on working together more closely. I know that's something that the AFA had previously expressed interest in, and I think it's a really good fit, and I'm happy to see that you're doing that. So thank you very much.
That's great to hear. All right, any additional questions or comments for our CAC? All right, not hearing any. Elisa, thank you very much. I appreciate the hard work and really enjoyed our time together the other week. And so look forward to doing more of that. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. All right, next we have a written summary. Move to agenda item number 5. We have a written summary of the February 17th steering committee meeting and a report from our staff director. But let me turn to Conti for any additional questions and updates. Conti?
Mr. Chair, we have a report of the Access for All Advisory Committee this month.
Sorry, did I miss that on my notes? I sure did. So sorry about that. Let me turn to our colleague, Kenneth Aguirre from the City of Alexandria, who will brief us on the discussion of our Access for All Advisory Committee. My apologies. Let me turn back to you, Kenneth.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Access for All Advisory Committee met virtually on February 12th, and this was the first meeting that I was able to chair. So, and this is the first time I'm able to report out to the full TPB group. So excited to do that. Real fast, just one more shout out to Casey Kostick for all her work that she's done over the last few years with the AFA. I really appreciate it. So during our meeting, we received an early look at the Visualized 2045 briefing from Ms. Armendariz, and the initial results from the TPB's region-wide public opinion survey and focus groups, basically in preparation for the 2022 update of Visualize 2045. In the survey, participants were asked about travel during the pandemic, also transportation future, so what does it look like after the pandemic, potentially 1 year after, as well as future and external factors such as climate change, equity, and autonomous vehicles. The focus groups will be used to supplement the data from the public opinion survey. And also what we discussed was the type of outreach that was used. We did have a full focus group entirely in Spanish that Ms. Armendariz was able to facilitate herself, but we're also looking into how we could potentially do other languages besides Spanish. In addition to looking to incorporate more voices from our community with disabilities. So to make sure that they're being heard, we did have folks in the survey and in the focus groups. I believe we did have an entire focus group with individuals with disabilities, but we want to make sure that we are getting enough of those individuals included in our process. Additionally, and this one was a point of a lot of discussion actually, was a presentation on the impacts of COVID-19 on direct transportation programs serving older adults and people with disabilities. I would actually encourage my colleagues to look at their own transportation budgets and how this is done in their own jurisdictions to make sure that there's some funding there, because we can't forget about some of our most vulnerable populations, right? And it's still very crucial for them to be able to travel to doctor's appointments, to grocery stores, to be able to see some of their family members. And also, so these transportation services such as Diamond, they're taking pretty big hits because a lot of their funding is being slashed. And, you know, again, like I said, these transportation services are crucial, and we need to be able to make sure that we are still serving our most vulnerable communities here in the DMV region. The last thing in terms of other businesses, couple of things to note. Our AFA member, Deborah Fisher, was appointed to the WMATA Accessibility Advisory Committee. So she will be the second AFA liaison, taking over for Charlie Crawford. Also, speaking of Charlie Crawford, I think it was very fitting that he received the WMATA 2020 Hettinger Award, which honors a person or organization whose efforts have resulted in significant improvements to accessible public transportation services for people with disabilities in the National Capital Region. And as you all know, Charlie passed not too long ago, and so that award is a big deal in WMATA, and so I think it was very appropriately given to Charlie. So we congratulated him on that. And also, our longtime AFA member, Gloria Sregina, was appointed to the Maryland Commission on People with Disabilities. So that was good news. And lastly, we also received an update about the CRISA funding, which I know will be talked about later on, so I won't go into any details about that. And as was mentioned previously, we're excited to be looking to collaborate with the CAC. So that's going to be something to put on the books if anyone is interested. And the last thing I'll mention is that all of our 2021 meeting dates are up. So if anyone is interested in joining us, everyone is always welcome. And that completes my report, and happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Let me turn first for questions, and since I rushed in and forgot to do this the right way for CAC, let me do it the right way for AFA, and we'll do the jurisdiction piece. So let me turn to the district first. Any questions? All right, let me turn to Maryland. Any questions? And now Virginia. And then WMATA and any other agencies? All right, well, thank you very much. Also really appreciate your comments about Charlie Crawford. Back from when I remember chairing AFA previous, just a really strong voice and leader in that space. And so really appreciate you mentioning the way in which he's been honored here and remembered. So thank you very much. All right, with that, we will now actually move to item number 5 on the agenda, even though I tried to get there for you, Conti, a little too early. Again, in your packet, you've got the summary of the February 17th Steering Committee meeting and report. And let me turn it over to Conti now for any additional summaries and updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. You have a copy of my written report, so I will just briefly draw attention to a couple of items. The steering committee met on February 5th and took the actions that are noted on pages 2 through 9 of my memo. I will also note that on page 8 is a letter that the steering committee approved. It's a joint TPB and Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee MWAC letter formally submitting comments to the US EPA on the EPA's proposed review and reevaluation of a 1986 policy related to use of catalytic converters in automobiles, which really helps reduce nitrogen oxide emissions from the tailpipe. The comment supports this review, and it calls for some nationally consistent policy with strict enforcement. This letter was due before the TPB meeting, so we requested the steering committee approve this, and the letter has since been submitted to the EPA docket. I would also like to note 2 solicitations that are currently open with members of the TPB, and you can certainly help spread the word within your jurisdiction. The first solicitation is an annual one for the Transportation Land Use Connections Program. We are accepting applications through March 8th, and this is for technical assistance to be provided to local agencies for planning projects that would connect transportation and land use. We will also be accepting applications from local transportation agencies for technical assistance to improve roadway safety till March 22nd. This is a new program that the board created last year, and there will be 2 sets of awards done in this calendar year. This is the first of the 2. Details are on page 12. One other document that was added this morning to the document that was provided to you last week is a letter we received from Maryland Department of Transportation. The letter is posted on the TPB Meeting website. The letter provides the board an update on Maryland's I-495, I-270 managed lanes project. The letter specifically notes that on January 27th of this year, Maryland Department of Transportation and the Maryland State Highway Administration has released a recommended preferred alternative design for the express lanes project within the limits of, on 495, the limits are from American Legion Bridge to I-270 spur, and on I-270 from the spur to I-370. The letter also provides the detailed description of the locally preferred alternative. If I were to summarize, it's essentially 2 additional express toll lanes in each direction along I-495 and 1 additional express toll lane along I-270 with the conversion of the existing HOV lanes along I-270 into an express toll lane. Additionally, the letter notes that the transit buses and vehicles with 3 or more people will be exempt from tolls. This will be something new in Maryland. And it also commits funding for express buses operating along these express toll lanes, some improvements to bicycle and pedestrian facilities, a trail connecting across the American Legion Bridge, and some bus capacity improvements at Shady Grove Metro Station. The letter includes a fact sheet and a preferred alternative press release. Now, I will note that even though this project is already included in Visualize 2045 and the air quality analysis for that plan, the details of the project that is in the plan is different from what has currently been described in the locally preferred alternative. And that is typical of any major project that is going through a federally required NEPA documentation. So as Maryland moves forward with this public consultation and refining the scope, we fully expect Maryland Department of Transportation to return to the TPB and formally request the board to change or amend the project that is already in Visualize 2045. I'm not sure what the time frame for that is, but that is just the process. The last thing, the TPB's solicitation of changes to the long-range transportation plan that we call Visualize 2045, and the TIP, and particularly what projects to be included in air quality conformity analysis. The solicitation period has ended. It ended on February 12th. Staff is currently reviewing all the paperwork that was submitted. We are working with your agency staffs to make sure that the documentation is all correct and appropriate. We plan to release all of these proposed changes for public review and comments by end of March, early April, and we will bring it back to this board in May so that you can review and approve those projects for including in the air quality conformity analysis. This will not be approving the new plan, but simply approving staff to begin the air quality conformity analysis. The plan approval will not happen until next year. And Mr. Aguirre reported on the AFA meeting and specifically the discussions about the adverse impact COVID-19 pandemic has had on some transportation service providers who provide services for older adults and people with disabilities. On page 19 of my report, there is a memo from staff Lynn Winchell-Mendy that summarizes the situation in this region. And I'm glad to note that under agenda item number 11 today, we will be releasing a notice of accepting applications from such transportation service providers who have had some adverse impacts on their financial situation due to the pandemic, to apply and receive some federal supplemental money that has been made available to the region under the Coronavirus Relief and Recovery Supplemental Appropriations Act. The region will be receiving about $590,000, which is what we intend to distribute on an expedited basis. Chair Allen, when we reported this last month, you advised us to take immediate action and to see how the process can be moved quickly. We do this process every other year, and it is with a larger amount of money, and that takes about 4 months. But this time we have put forth a proposal to be completely done with this in 2 months, and that will be under agenda item 11. That was all I had, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Kanti. Let me turn to questions from our members. So first, let me turn to the District of Columbia. All right, and not hearing any, let me next turn to Maryland.
Carolyn, this is Casey from Tacoma Park.
Hey, Casey.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions about the timing and the long-range plan that you had mentioned. I'm curious about two separate things. One, you mentioned that the updated MDOT plan would come forward to the board for review and approval. Is that a separate process from the larger set of things that are submitted for the long-range plan, or is that a part of that as well?
It is part of it. I'm glad. Thank you for the question. I can explain the process this way. Every 4 years, we are federally required to update the plan, and that is a fixed time frame. And if we miss that deadline, then all federal funding for all the transportation agencies and transit agencies will be halted till the plan is approved. So that is the requirement. That deadline for us is 2022. So we need to have that done by that time frame. So we have started that work now. Before the feds can approve the updated plan, because we are a non-attainment area, we have to first conduct an air quality conformity analysis. And the sole purpose of that analysis is to calculate the emissions for ozone and make sure that the amount of estimated emissions from ozone is below the levels that have been established for our region, that we call the emissions budget. That process takes about 9 months. It's a very detailed technical analysis. So before the TPB approves any changes to the current plan has already been approved, but that approval will expire in 2022. So before we submit any, approve any changes to the currently approved plan, we have to do this analysis. So what we will be bringing, what we have currently asked all the member agencies, your transportation agencies, is to review the projects that are already in the currently approved plan and ask them, are there any changes to it? Are you going to discontinue any of them? Are you going to advance any of them? Are you going to add anything, or are you going to change the scope of any of them? So we have asked for that. That information is what we have just received. That is the information we will be asking the board to review and approve in May. So what the board will be doing in May is telling staff, we approve you to begin the technical analysis on the air quality conformity using this set of projects. We will then begin our 9-month-long process of analyzing all of that. And once we have the results, we bring back the results to the board and to the public for comment and review. And once that conformity analysis has gone through public comment review and the board approval, we submit it to the Federal Highway and FTA for their approval. And they typically take about 60 to 90 days. So that is the process that the TPB uses. And one additional thing, this particular year, every 4 years, in addition to updating the projects, we also have to update the financial plan. So every project, whether it's highway or transit, that goes into the plan has to submit the estimated cost and the anticipated sources of revenue for that project. We are currently working through that process, both on the transit side and on the highway side. We are working with the transportation agencies and trying to see what their assumptions are for the next 25 years on the revenue side. So both of that we plan to bring to the board in May.
And I appreciate you had answered some questions, I think, at the last meeting about the climate emissions and the air quality and how all of that will interact with the targets that we set for greenhouse gas emissions. I think, if I recall correctly, you said that would be finished, that work would be finished by next spring. So how will the work that goes into looking at climate impacts of this plan be different than it was in the past? And can some of the work that's being done for that longer term analysis be used to inform what we're looking at this year?
Good. I'm glad you said, how will this be different than before? And that's important, because I don't believe that the TPB's focus on climate will be something new in the plan. It has always been there. It is about 10 years ago that the TPB first did a detailed analysis on climate change, focused on greenhouse gases. It started that work in 2009, and it adopted the report and published the report in 2010. So since then, every time we ask the member jurisdictions, your transportation agencies, your transit agencies, to look at the projects that are in the plan, to look at the investments they choose to make on projects, we have always said we have to attain the air quality standards, whether it's for ozone or for particulate matter. We have to address the climate change challenges. We have to address other aspirational priorities, such as reducing single occupant vehicles, increasing transit ridership, increasing carpool, bringing jobs and homes closer together. All of these policy priorities we have been asking for the member jurisdictions to consider when they submit the projects. This time, these earlier reports that the TPB has done, after 2010, TPB did another analysis in 2015, and that time it joined hands with MWAC and COG, and it was called the Multi-Sector Working Group. In all of those were seen as independent, separate analysis. This time, how I see this being different is we are trying to complete this report in December, but the full plan will not be adopted till April, May of next year. And this time, the results of the analysis of the climate change mitigation study and the findings that we take from that study will actually be integrated into the plan document itself. So moving forward, when anybody sees what is the National Capital Region's long-range transportation plan, they are going to see our aspirational initiatives, they're going to see our focus on safety, and they're equally going to see the focus and priority for climate change projects. So that is how I envision this thing coming together. That said, how effective the projects have been in trying to help reduce greenhouse gases or reduce ozone emissions, that is something we started reporting way back in 2014. Every time we do the emissions analysis, even though the federal requirement does not require us to do it, TPB has asked us to calculate greenhouse gas emissions and report it back. And that's what we have been doing. We do see that over the long 25-year period, greenhouse gases are forecast to go down, but not at the rates at which the regional targets are there. So we, even back in 2010, we identified the kinds of actions that would be needed. For example, we said if gas prices, in 2010, we said if gas prices were $7 a gallon, it would help reduce a considerable amount of greenhouse gases. It would still not get us, that alone would still not get us to 80% below 2005 levels. There were a number of other things that were needed, but those were all in a standalone report. Hopefully this time, when people look at the TPB's transportation plan, they will see the level of outcomes we will need to achieve in transportation to attain our climate change goals.
Thank you very much. I think as we move forward as a board, we also should be thinking about how we can utilize that information to consider which projects we approve and whether they really are meeting our goals as well, and if there's more we can do on that. And I hope there'll be opportunities to look at that despite kind of the challenges with the timing of it all, but I think that will be very important for us to focus on as a board.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you, Casey. All right, and then were there, let's see, I think we've gone to Virginia yet. So let me see, any questions from Virginia for Conti? And any questions for Conti from WMATA or other agencies? All right, well, thank you, Conti, as always. Next, we're going to move to item number 6, the chairman's remarks. I'll try to keep them brief. I briefly noted this issue last month, but I want to note that as we think about 2021, now that we're firmly in 2021, that while we don't know exactly which month or which week, that this will be the year that we begin to come out of our current pandemic period and enter a much more active period of recovery on the social, economic, and mobility fronts. Most importantly, what steps we've taken in recent months and what steps we take in the coming months are going to significantly shape what that recovery looks like and how we prioritize those that most need a more equitable transportation system across our region. And I know that while as a board, we do have a number of previously scheduled federally prescribed planning activities, I really want us to be able to help stay engaged in that recovery planning from our seats and position here at TPB. The restrictions on movement during this pandemic, in my opinion, it's highlighted a few things that we can build on and expand to help reduce congestion, reduce emissions, and offer our residents other options to move around. Things like more people who are able to work from home, more people walking and biking, using technology to reach more people for their input. Of course, similarly, the pandemic has highlighted areas where we must do much better in terms of our planning to be resilient to meet the travel needs of our residents. Clearly, impacts on service for our older adults or individuals with disabilities, equitable access to technology, or equitable opportunity to telework. I believe that local and regional bus service is also an important area here, given the disproportionate impact of disruptions that in service has had on transit-dependent residents. I've asked Conti to work this into the staff activities in consultation with our technical committees and look forward to the work that's going to take place there. Last month, we also heard from staff an assessment of the pandemic impacts on the region's economy, transportation, and environment. We asked staff to continue monitoring this throughout the year, and later today, we're going to hear findings from a public opinion survey that our staff undertook to help us get a sense of our residents' expectations for improving the transportation system. We know that organizations providing transportation services to older adults and people with disabilities have been impacted during this pandemic. I'm also glad under agenda item number 11 today, we'll be releasing the process we're going to use to award federal funding that's made available to our region. So I know that I can count on us to stay engaged and find the most effective ways in which TPB can assist each one of us as we work within our own jurisdictions to prepare for and recover from this pandemic. And I also know that we can look forward to our continued partnership to make sure that our recovery is truly a recovery for our entire region. So thank you very much. Next, let's move to information items. Item number 7 on the agenda. This is the work plan and budget for us, very important. Lynn Erickson will get us started with an overview of the planned work activities for our staff during the upcoming fiscal year. And then we'll review this document this month, and next month we're going to be asked to approve it so that it can be submitted to the federal side for approval. So Lynn, let me turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. So Leo's going to put up our slide presentation here. Yeah, so go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Leo. I hope you all learned a little something new from last month's Unified Planning Work Program presentation. So I provided some tidbits on the process itself, how to best navigate it, and I described the annual activities staff conducts. This month, we are asking you to take a look at the actual document, and I'm going to walk you through how to read the heart of our budget and also describe some discrete activities and projects that staff will be engaged in next year. You will be asked to approve the UPWP next month. Next slide, please. So the UPWP is the document that demonstrates how we carry out the MPO activities. It serves as the TPB staff work scope for the upcoming fiscal year. All right, so sit tight as I explain something that is complicated, but necessary for you guys to understand. The board is, after all, going to be asked to approve a $17.5 million budget. So I'm talking about the federal funding that is specifically allocated to the Metropolitan Transportation Planning process. Federal Highway Administration PL and Federal Transit Administration Section 5303 funding. So keep in mind that MPOs do not compete for federal funding. We are allocated a specific amount through the federal authorization bills, so we know what's available to us. We don't invoice the federal government directly. Our 3 state DOTs are the direct recipients, and this means that they have a special role in our process. Besides having to pay more than the other TPB members, and the rest of you all pay a 10% match through your local dues, the state DOTs are a partner, and technically they are federally responsible to oversee our federal process. So now on to the budget. So I would argue that the 3 most important pages of the UPWP document are tables 1, 2, and 3, located on pages 25 through 27 of the actual document. But if you're looking at the PDF, it's pages 29 through 31. So Leo, I'm going to ask you to pull up the table 1 for me, please. So the tables 1, 2, and 3 are our revenue and expenditure summary tables. So you guys all have access to this document on the meeting materials page. So I'm starting on table 1, page 25. So keep in mind that the PL and the 5303 funding comes only to us, and we can spend it in whatever year we want to spend it in. It doesn't go away. So our revenue totals are combined from 3 pots or buckets, if you will. It's a combination of old money and new money. So you can see this described in the left column. So first we have our new federal money. In this case, it's federal fiscal year 2021. Second, we have old money that was allocated to us, but we didn't spend. We call this prior unexpended, and it's from the 2020 UPWP. The third pot of money is funding that we don't plan to spend by the end of this current fiscal year, called carryover funding. Carryover is essentially choice funding. So we can choose to roll it over immediately into the next fiscal year, like say we have something cool that we want to do right now, or we can wait 2 years to spend it. So if you add all these 3 buckets up, we have about 17 million to spend and work with within fiscal 2022. So Leo, if you could go to table 2, please. Table 2 is on page 26. I will go into detail on the actual work we plan to do later in the presentation, but this is the framework for how all of our work is basically organized in the document. The 10 core activities support the region as a whole and are structured to follow our federal requirements, starting with the plan. In this table, we identify each major work activity or category and how much we expect to spend to complete the tasks identified with those activities, all of which are detailed in the text later on in that draft document. And all of those details were also in that 16-page outline I shared with you back in January. And I'm hoping that you guys made it through every word. So you have 2 opportunities to go to see what we're going to be up to. All right, Leo, if you could go to table 3, please. So table 3 is a more detailed accounting explanation of table 2, and it breaks down the budget into those categories that our funding agencies need to track and report our spending. So now if you could go back to the slide 4. There we go. All right, so slide 4, if you don't want to go through all of table 3 in the document, this is your succinct summary here. So our summary here demonstrates how that $17.5 million is really broken down. So we have about 5.6 million for staff salaries, about 2.7 million for programs and studies, like our new regional roadway safety program and our climate change mitigation study. So I want to make a couple observations. So the main one that I have here is that our budget is actually really, really tight this time around. We've got a lot of work to do, and there are fewer dollars this year available to tackle our ambitious workload. So one reason is that we know our federal appropriation is coming in lower. So as far as where we are in confirming these numbers for now, we are actually ahead of the game this budget cycle, in part since we had to try to figure out how to pay for the climate change mitigation study this year. And we really had to take a look at each discrete activity to see how and when we can make them happen, or if we can wait into the next year to complete the task. So again, I'll talk about this a little later, but if you could take a look at the carryover memo, also included in the materials page. Carryover is one of those revenue buckets I had just talked about from table 1. So we met with the states to hammer out the funding details, and while we're still waiting for confirmation on some of the buckets, we think that any changes that will happen between now and March are minimal. Next slide, please. So last month, I provided details on our annual or recurring activities. Now I'm going to highlight some specific tasks of what we plan to do this upcoming fiscal year. I do want to remind you all of the importance of our subject matter expert advisory committees and subcommittees, since all of these activities that I will be describing will come to you after they go through the committees. This is where we get great feedback and consensus on our work. Many of the activities we are planning to do will serve to enhance our plan development. As you know, TPB kicked off the update to Visualize 2045 in December. In 2022, staff will complete the plan document and appendices. We will finalize the new performance measures being developed, and we will complete additional public outreach, including conducting a second comment period for the plan. Staff will summarize all public opinion and outreach efforts in a Voices of the Region online story map. There are many related planning activities and studies that will be reflected in the update to Visualize 2045. A key activity in 2022 will be the update of the TPB's Regional Freight Plan, the first such update since 2016. And as you can imagine, our Freight Subcommittee will play a pivotal role in the development of that plan. The National Capital Trail Network Map, which you first approved last year, will receive its annual update, which hopefully will reflect progress by member agencies toward completing the network. Our Bicycle and Pedestrian Subcommittee will help lead that effort. Staff will be conducting, with consultant assistance, the Climate Change Mitigation Study, which will identify the best ways for our region to reduce on-road transportation sector greenhouse gas emissions in order to attain emissions reductions targets associated with the years 2030 and 2050. Through a white paper, we will communicate the findings of our research study on transportation resiliency and adaptation activities in our region, and staff will conduct coordination activities based on the findings. Next slide, Leo, please. Staff looks to produce draft principles for connected and automated vehicles for your consideration. Additional enhancements address planning elements that are also components of Visualize 2045, including addressing federal performance-based planning and programming requirements, featuring data analysis supporting target setting. As part of the Regional Land Use and Transportation Planning Coordination Program, staff will continue to examine the relationship and implications of regional land use and transportation actions and continue to develop the cooperative forecasts. This includes supporting the final approval of Round 9.2 cooperative forecasts and the initial activities of Round 10, which is the next major round, which will begin during fiscal 2022. Next slide, please. The TPB supports multimodal initiatives. We will award about $6.2 million in enhanced mobility grant funding to area agencies and nonprofits. And in spring 2022, we will initiate the update of the region's Human Service Transportation Coordination Plan, led by our Access for All Advisory Committee. We will be hoping that your applications to our TAP and our TLC programs will reflect needs that the TPB identified in the TPB's list of transit access focus areas that you approved last year. We are also excited to see what applications we receive for our new Regional Roadway Safety Program as well. And as Conchi just mentioned or reminded you all, our deadline is March 22nd. Next slide, please. This slide shows additional highlights for fiscal 2022. We will be running another Community Leadership Institute session where we hope to turn out another 20 regional transportation graduates into the District, Maryland, and Virginia. Staff will continue to conduct important research and analysis of regional travel trends through its travel monitoring and data programs. These activities will include analyzing numerous numerous travel surveys, including the Regional Travel Survey, the Visualize 2045 Public Opinion Survey, and the Employer Survey, among others, to understand and describe how regional travel has changed, resulting from both long-term trends and short-term disruptions, such as COVID-19. Staff will also develop a dashboard containing key travel data and information and conduct travel monitoring studies and updates. As part of its data programs, staff will also continue to maintain the Geographic Information System and Data Clearinghouse services, which support all planning activities throughout the department. In the area of travel forecasting and mobile emissions planning, TPB staff will use and support its soon-to-be-released projection use travel model, the Gen 2 version 2.4 model. Staff will also continue to develop, with consultant assistance, the TPB's next-generation travel demand forecasting model known as the Gen 3 model. Lastly, TPB staff will develop mobile emissions inventories and new emissions budgets related to the state implementation plans, or SIPs, to meet the 2015 Ozone National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Staff will continue to support our local, state, and regional DOTs and transit partners through the Technical Assistance Program, which assists our partners with preliminary planning of projects, programs, or policy evaluations that advance metropolitan transportation planning. So last slide, please, Leo. So our next steps are to continue to refine the estimates and adjust the budget accordingly. And we'll come back to you next month with a final document for approval. We will also be finalizing which activities will not be accomplished during this 2021 fiscal year and take the steps to roll them over into the new fiscal 2022 UPWP, which we call carryover funding. So as I mentioned, we have already identified funding and activities to move into fiscal 2022. And you should take a look at our first cut of the memo we included with the materials. So please provide your comments on both the document and the carryover memo by March 1st, so we can address them in time for the March mail-out cycle. Just a reminder, most of this information has been posted for review since January 4th, when we released the UPWP outline. So in March, we will ask the board to take 3 actions. First is to amend the current UPWP, the 2021, to pull out and remove the carryover funding and activities. The second is to take an action to actually carry it over into the fiscal 2022 UPWP. And the third action is to approve the fiscal 2022 UPWP in its entirety. After board approval in March, we submit it to the feds and work begins on July 1st. That is all. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Lynn. All right, so we've got 1 month to study up, and then we've got the budget for an action item for next month. But with that, thank you for walking us through this. Let me start. I'm going to mix it up, and this time I'm going to ask for questions in reverse order. So let me first turn to WMATA and any agencies for questions.
None from me.
All right, let me turn to Virginia.
Hi, Dave Snyder. Quick question. It may help our homework go more smoothly. This is a wonderful presentation of a comprehensive approach for budgetary and sort of technical governmental type accounting and accountability. But I wondered if it would be helpful to do a thematic review. For example, what are the elements of this that address sustainability? What are the elements of this that address equity? What are the elements of this that address safety? So that if I were a member of the public and I would say, okay, what's TPB doing about any of these 3 things? Where it would add to transparency and accountability if we sort of link these different programs and different projects thematically.
We can go back and take a look at it, but the reality is it's everything basically crosses and interconnects with each other. So in each of the 10 tasks, there's some element of equity. And actually it's, if you, in the actual writing part of the document, the opening introduction to the 10 tasks do summarize this a bit, including, equity, sustainability. Every single task really takes into consideration most of those things. We haven't gone back to look and pull them out into a separate crosswalk, if you will, but we can look into that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions from Virginia? All right, let me turn to Maryland.
Hey, this is Earl Lewis with MDOT. I noticed in the table on page 25, it shows Maryland having more money than Virginia and DC. But in the footnotes, that's only because the FY22 new money, I guess, has not been updated. It's 21 for Virginia and DC, which I would assume those numbers will likely go up in 22. Is that a question for you, Lynn? Or?
So, well, I may turn to Conti for this, but this table reflects what we know right now. We got more information from DC last week. It should be federal fiscal 2021. I believe Tyson sent us a letter from you all, which said what's in there. And I would say over time, it's each state makes a determination based on their own formulas on what goes to each state or what goes to each MPO. So I would definitely look from Maryland only like what you've done over time to match up with what you've set aside, because it's just vastly different for each state and they do accounting in a different way.
Good, so don't compare the states. Thank you.
Yeah, don't, correct.
And the district, yeah, correct. Thank you.
Thanks, Earl. Any other questions from Maryland? All right, any questions from the district? Lynn, I had just one technical question. and that is, as we're going to see most likely, Congress taking action, which is going to yield different type of either relief or stimulus or infrastructure type of spending that comes out. In the event that you had to make any mid-year adjustments based on congressional action of funding, is that something to be brought back to TPB to do a mid-year adjustment to the budget, or do you have enough budgetary flexibility working with partners to make that change?
I think the latter. So we definitely have enough budgetary flexibility. It would depend. I wouldn't anticipate us getting any major changes to the PL or 5303 funding. What could change is where we focus staff priority and staff time. So that's what we would first look to do. So I mean, we do look at it as a whole. I mean, it really is just an on the ground operational. How do we manage our time? Who's doing what's available, and what? And we do flow for everything from what is federally required to what are our own internal deadlines. So, for example, that's why the plan and the deadlines that Stacey's presented several times are so important to maintain, because those are the deadlines that would have the most impacts if we meet those. For the other internal deadlines, and board deadlines, we would be working, if anything needed to change drastically, or we would have to reprioritize staff time and such, we would be working with not only the chairs, but the board as well if we really needed to. But I don't envision anything changing that much.
Mr. Allen, Mr. Chair, if I could add, while we are not likely, we are not expecting a major change to how MPOs are funded. We always welcome giving us a little bit more money. That's where our problem is. However, should the federal government, as part of the reauthorization, really come up with a major workable infrastructure investment plan? Right now, in the work program that we have, there is no explicit activity to help the region go after a federal infrastructure grant. If something like that comes about and we see an opportunity, then we will come back to the board and say, hey, we would like to work with the member jurisdictions and to go after that. That we do preserve, we try to preserve some flexibility in staff time and funding to help make that happen. If not, the state DOTs have been very cooperative in terms of looking at the technical assistance to help us do that. So we are keeping an eye on that eventually.
Got it. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Well, Lynn, thank you very much. The one piece you said is to make sure anyone who has additional questions or comments gets them to you in advance. And then we will, again, as a reminder, this will come up as an action item at our next monthly meeting. All right. Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate it. All right. Well, we are now then going to move to agenda item number 8. We're right on schedule at 1:05. My hunch is that the next item is what we spend a good amount of time on. So we're going to try to keep things moving so we don't run out of time on item number 9. So number 8 is briefing on the draft FY 2022 Commuter Connections Work Program. It's an important regional program that TPB helps implement, this region's travel demand management program. Nick Ramphos is going to review the annual work plan and budget this month. And again, this is going to be an action item next month where we'll be asked to adopt this plan. Let me turn to Nick now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Leo, if you could just go to the next slide. In today's mail-out packet, there was a draft FY 2022 Commuter Connections Work Program. We also have a companion Commuter Connections Strategic Plan and a definition of commuter connections, which really is a group of public and private transportation organizations in the region, which includes COG, our state funding partners, as well as all of our local jurisdictions and other organizations that are working together to encourage individuals in the region to use alternatives to the single occupant automobile. Next slide. There are many benefits of commuter connections that we've been able to document over the years, including those to jurisdictions, employers, and workers. The program helps reduce and manage congestion, also helps reduce emissions. It helps support local efforts to attract and retain employers. For the employers themselves, it helps with recruitment and retention efforts. And then for the workers, it provides options to them for commuting, as well as helping to reduce stress, costs, and time of commuting, as well as an overall improvement in the quality of life. Next slide, please. Our geographic area is very large for the program. So if you see the outlined area in the middle, that's our non-attainment region, and that's where the emphasis of the program is for workers in that particular region. However, if you look at the yellow area, that's our commuter shed for the Guaranteed Ride Home program, because we also help operate the Guaranteed Ride Home program in the Baltimore region. And then the lighter yellow is our commuter shed for commuters using our ride matching services. So we have commuters coming from all areas, including Pennsylvania, Delaware, Eastern Shore, West Virginia, and even as far as down south as Richmond. Okay, next slide, please. We also rank fairly high in both, when we look at census numbers, which we'll probably have new numbers soon because these numbers are based on the 2010 census. But in terms of carpooling and transit use in the region, we're in the top 5 urban areas across the country for both of those programs, or both of those modes, use of those modes. Okay, next slide, please. We also have a very rigorous evaluation process. So we're able to measure the impacts of the program, both on the transportation side as well as the air quality side. So as part of that, every 3 years, we conduct a TDM analysis, and we collect a lot of data. And from that, we're able to come down to be able to, essentially pinpoint those reductions. And so for vehicle trips, the program reduces 137,000 vehicle trips per day, 2.6 million vehicle miles of travel, about 0.5 ton of NOx, and about almost 0.5 ton of VOC. Of course, some of that has changed because of the pandemic, but as recovery starts occurring, we're going to continue measurement of these impacts. Next slide, please. We also have a role in the regional planning process in terms of the congestion management process, and that does include TDM as a major component in that plan. And Commuter Connections does provide a lot of information in that process, and we will continue to do so as that plan is updated on a regular basis. Okay, next slide, please. We also support regional air quality goals, as well as the region's Visualize 2045, and our program is also outlined in the tip. And results from the program can also help contribute to performance measures and goals set by the region under the FAST Act requirements. And we're also part of the TPB's endorsed initiatives. Next slide, please. We also look at the cost effectiveness of the program. And based on the evaluation that we've done, we're able to show that we're spending about 18 cents for every vehicle trip that's reduced, about a penny for every vehicle mile of travel that's reduced, about $48,000 for every ton of NOx that is reduced, and about $63,000 for every ton of VOC that's reduced. And these are pretty cost-effective numbers when you look at the program overall. And on the next slide, we also show daily societal benefit costs. If we can advance the slide. We show not only the air pollution and climate change benefits, but we also look at noise pollution, hours of delay that's reduced for congestion, as well as fuel savings and health and safety, based on the analysis that we've done. And overall, when you add up all of these benefits, it's a little over $700,000 per day for the cost benefit savings as part of this program. Next slide. I'm going to shift to the budget now. When we look at the FY 2021 versus FY 2022, there are some increases in the budget. Next year is going to be a big data collection year for us. So when you look at the program evaluation budget, that's the one that shoots up the most, just because we are going to be conducting several big surveys, including surveying all of our Guaranteed Ride Home participants, both in the DC and the Baltimore regions, as well as collecting data for the next State of the Commute data collection survey. and that's going to happen in 2022. So the total budget is going to be close to $7 million. Next slide. And when we take a closer look at that budget, it's about a 9% increase from this fiscal year. And when you break down the budget, about 30% of it goes to staff and overhead. A little over half goes to private sector services. We pass about 8% through to local jurisdictions, and there's probably about 6% in direct costs. Next slide, please. So some of the new activities in the FY22 2022 work program include a new grant that we received from the Federal Highway Administration. It's the Advanced Transportation and Congestion Management Technologies Deployment Program, or as I finally call it, ATC-MTD, and that is the actual acronym. We did receive that grant this past year, and we're just kicking off the project. So there are going to be certain components that we're going to be using through our operations center and marketing to leverage those federal dollars as part of our cost share arrangement with the Federal Highway Administration. So that's going to be a very exciting project. And the whole idea behind that project is to expand our Incent Trip mobile app. And that will include expanding it to the rest of Maryland, also expanding it down to the Richmond area for super commuters coming up to our area. And we're going to be looking to develop a digital payment process as part of the app, as well as develop an employer module that will help employers be able to use that app for sustainability goals that they may have or employer challenges that they want to do. And so they'll have their own dashboard that they'll be able to use. And then we're also going to extend that technology to our vulnerable communities in our equity emphasis area. So we're going to be looking at making sure that that same information is going to be distributed in an equitable fashion across the region. And that will be over a 3-year period as part of that grant process. As I mentioned earlier, we do have some monitoring and evaluation projects that are going to dominate for next year. We are going to be updating our framework methodology, which is really our blueprint on how we collect data and how we evaluate it as part of the program. We'll be also designing the 2022 State of the Commute report, the survey itself, not the report. We're also going to be collecting the data as part of that, and we'll be drafting a technical report. And then we'll also be conducting in-depth surveys for both of our Guaranteed Ride Home programs that we're operating. Next slide. In terms of next steps, the state funding agencies have provided their initial comments and edits on the draft of the CCWP. The Commuter Connections Subcommittee also reviewed that draft back in November, and we set up a comment period. We addressed those comments, and our state funding agencies reviewed the document again and submitted additional comments, and then we presented the final document to them in January for final review and approval. We also presented the final document to the Commuter Connections Subcommittee in January, and that was endorsed for release. Next slide, please. And we presented it to the TPB's Technical Committee on February 5th, and we'll be briefing that group again on March 5th. We are presenting this document to you today, and we will be accepting comments as well. So if you do have any comments, we'd appreciate any feedback. And then we'll be back, as Chairman Allen mentioned, on March 17th for final approval. If we have to make any adjustments to the tip, we will do so afterwards. And the goal is to begin the program on July 1st. And I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. You're showing off with some of those acronyms. That was impressive. I appreciate that. All right, let me first turn to any questions from the district. All right, let me next turn to Maryland.
One comment that I have for Maryland is thank you for entertaining, working with us to expand Incent Trip, throughout the state, throughout the region. It's appreciated. Thanks.
We're looking forward to that project, and we appreciate all the staff support we're getting from MDOT as well.
Right.
Anyone else from Maryland?
Yes, hi, Councilmember Denny Taveras.
What is the GRH? The acronym?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that is our Guaranteed Ride Home program. So that program provides rides back to individuals' places of origin in the event that there's an emergency that they may experience on the job or unscheduled overtime. And so as long as you're registered, although you don't have to be registered as a first-time user, you basically call our number and we'll arrange to get you back to your vehicle either by taxi cab, Uber, or car rental, just depending on what the situation is and where you live.
Awesome.
It's kind of like an insurance, having an insurance policy on your commute.
And Nick, this is provided only to those who are not driving to work, right? Using transit,
Yes,
walking,
yes, you
biking.
definitely have to. Yes, yeah, at least twice a week, be in some type of an alternative mode to be able to use that service.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let me turn to Virginia.
Can I jump in, Cheryl?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
I
this
couldn't hear
is
who that
Casey
was.
from Tacoma Park.
Hey, Casey.
This is Casey from Tacoma Park. Thanks. I was just wondering, with regard to COVID and the changes in people's commutes and use, I imagine that has impacted people's willingness and comfort level with things like carpooling and using transit and all of those things. Do you have specific plans to do some outreach and education or to work with people who are involved in carpooling or to work with transit agencies to specifically address that and try to overcome some of that?
As a matter of fact, yes, and some of this has transpired at the urging of our committees, as well as I know it's a priority of Chairman Allen's, and so we are going to be working on a recovery, what I'll call educational plan for commuters in the region. We're going to spend the next month or two just working on the specifics of that with all of our stakeholders. And we'll have it ready to go. It'll be on the shelf, and the minute that our state funding agencies and our network members, or even this body, feels that it's appropriate to move forward with it, we'll release it. And the whole goal is really to get folks back to a comfort level of using, whether it's the local bus, the subway, or metro, commuter rail, even the long haul commuter buses. We have our van pooling program in the region has basically just been decimated. We used to have, many, hundreds and close to probably over thousands of vans that were out on the road, and those have just, really just kind of gone away. Or right now they're basically glorified carpools. You may have like 2 or 3 people in those vans, and so we're working with the van pooling community to try and figure out, what's the best way of getting folks back into those van pools as the region recovers, and as well as the carpooling community. Many folks just are real reticent to get into a car, with strangers that, they're not sure, where they've been or, what their status is. So we're trying to really encourage folks to either carpool with neighbors or people they know, or with their coworkers. So this is a known quantity, and you're really not getting into a car with people you just don't, you're not familiar with. It's going to be a slow process. I think it's going to be a crawl, walk, run process. But we want to start something. We want to make sure that we're ready, and we want to be part of the region's recovery efforts. And that's really going to be the whole goal.
All right, thank you. Let me turn to Virginia now. All right. WMATA and any other agencies?
No, thank you, sir.
Good. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. And again, this will come back for an action item at our March meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. All right, next item is the survey. I noted during my remarks, I have a hunch that this is going to be really interesting to all of us and probably going to have a fair amount of conversation. So I want to make sure we have time for that. We're going to hear the voices from our region on the changes to their travel during the pandemic, their planned changes in a post-pandemic period, and their expectations for transportation improvements, and also on a few larger topics such as equity, climate change, technology. Karen Armendariz, and I apologize if I mispronounced that, is going to get us started. And I believe we also have a guest who will be helping present this. So Karen, let me turn to you.
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Armendariz, and I'm the Public Engagement Specialist here at TPB COG. So back in the fall of 2020, we conducted a region-wide public opinion research, public opinion survey, which later became known as Voices of the Region. So the purpose behind that survey was not only to provide a medium for residents of the region to give us their opinion on various transportation issues that affect the region, but also we really wanted to capture a public opinion snapshot of what is going on, how people feel about different transportation issues. And we wanted that for multiple reasons. One of them is to help us with inform the work that the TPB is doing. That includes the development of the long-range transportation plan. But also we wanted to have this, capture the snapshot so we could help inform the planning and decision-making in the region. So we hope that the results that are coming out of the survey can really provide quantitative support for future projects, programs, and policies that all of you might be planning, especially those that align with our TPB policy priority areas. So as we planned the survey, we had a diverse set of questions because we wanted to learn as much as we could from the people in our region. But we also knew that we were not going to be able to learn everything we needed to learn or reach out to everyone we needed to reach out to. So along with that, we designed methodology, qualitative methodology that aligns with the quantitative methodology from the survey in order to react and address to any gaps that we might have on the survey, but also to supplement any of the information that is coming from the survey with qualitative narratives. So the survey plus the focus groups, that makes our phase one of our public opinion research efforts, for the update to Visualize 2045. So that the public opinion and the survey, the public opinion survey and the focus groups make our phase one. And it will be followed by our phase two, which is a more general open outreach campaign, which will happen in the summer of 2021. So with that, I will pass on the presentation to Olivia, who will be talking to you about the survey, which is our step one, and there will be more to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Saucier, and I'm a survey manager with ICF. I'm excited to be here today to present the key findings and results from this public opinion survey. I have two colleagues from ICF on the call as well, Heather Driscoll, our survey director, and Randy Zawalik, our statistician. So as Karen mentioned, the Voices of the Region survey was a representative web survey of the DC metropolitan region that fielded last fall. We targeted 2,000 completed surveys, and that was 200 in each of 10 sub-areas. We selected respondents using a method called address-based sampling. So that's a probability-based way of selecting respondents using a frame from the post office, essentially, using postal addresses. And we used that to randomly select addresses to be included in our sample. And respondents were invited to participate using up to 3 mailed contacts. And the first letter that they received had a $1 bill as a pre-incentive. When we closed the survey, we had just over 2,400 completes, and our final response rate was just under 12%. So the results I present to you today are accurate within a margin of error of plus or minus 2.5%. And I'll also mention that the survey questionnaire, as Karen mentioned, was created in collaboration between ICF and TPB, and it was available in both English and Spanish. So let's look at the results. I'll just note that as I go through these findings with you, I'll point out when differences between certain subgroups are statistically significant. And what that means is that the difference between the different groups, say, for example, regular transit users and non-regular users, is stronger than what we would expect to see merely from chance. So in layman's terms, it essentially means that we can infer a real difference between the two groups. So the first section of our survey looked at changes in general travel, and this looks at all travel, not just commuting for work. And these were changes since the beginning of the pandemic. So the first question we asked is, since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, how much has your daily travel changed? And as you can see, 2/3 of respondents say that their daily travel habits have changed a lot since the beginning of the pandemic. And I'll just note that as we go through these slides, you'll see the actual survey question at the top of the slide and the total N, or number of people who got asked the question, in parentheses. So you may be wondering what changes looked like. This slide shows what travel was like before the pandemic. So, and again, we're talking about general daily travel here, not just work travel. So we can see that about 2/3 of respondents drove every day. And I get that number by adding up the two blue columns on the left. In terms of use of public transportation, we had 28% of respondents use public transportation at least once a week before the pandemic. So I do that by summing up these yellow bars here. And then I'll just note that public transportation included Metro bus, other local buses, subway and Metro rail, commuter trains, and commuter buses. And then for biking, those are the red bars. 21% of residents biked at least once a month before the pandemic. So what kind of mode changes are we seeing during the pandemic? The green bars show where there's been a decrease in use, and the blue bars show where there's been an increase. So since the beginning of the pandemic, 3/4 of residents have been using a car less than before, with 44% saying they're driving or riding in a car a lot less. 63% of respondents are taking public transportation a lot less, including not at all. And then moving to walking and biking, I know we've all read in the news how the pandemic has kind of created new momentum for walking and biking. And this is borne out by the data from the survey. We see that if you take the two blue bars here together, 50% of respondents say that they've been walking more since the beginning of the pandemic, and 17% are saying that they're biking more. So let's go back to public transportation and look into this decrease in ridership a little bit more on the next slide. So we wanted to gauge the level of support for various changes to public transportation to try to encourage ridership. So we asked 1 year after the COVID-19 pandemic is over, which of these changes would make you more likely to use public transportation? And people could check all that applied here. And only those who reported that their ridership had decreased were asked this question. And we broke out the results by frequent transit users and non-frequent users. Frequent users were defined as people who rode transit at least once a week. So the most popular change was more frequent cleaning of buses or train cars, followed by more spacing between people on buses or train cars. In the other category, which was selected by 8% of respondents and where people could write in a suggestion or response, or type in, I should say, we have some interesting ideas here, including an available COVID vaccine, mandatory mask wearing and temperature checks, open windows, and better ventilation or filtration. Next, we asked respondents to visualize their travel habits 1 year after the pandemic was over, and we asked them, do you expect that your travel habits will return to your previous pattern before the pandemic? 38% of respondents said they will probably have different travel habits, while 62% said they expected they would go back to the same travel habits as before. So what kinds of changes are people expecting? That will be in the next slide here. So these are of the people who expect to make a change. These are the modes that they expect to use differently. The green bars show modes they expect to use more. So over half said that they expected to walk more than before the pandemic. And this was the most common option selected. So this shows that that increase in both walking and biking that I just noted in the earlier slide may continue after the pandemic is over. Somewhat smaller numbers said they expected to use cars less and use public transportation less. Okay, we've talked about general travel. Let's turn our attention to work-related travel. So all respondents who were currently working full-time, part-time, or going to school were asked a series of questions about their commutes. So the first was, before the pandemic, how did you commute to work or school? Then during the pandemic, how are you commuting to work or school? Finally, how do you expect to commute to work or school 1 year after the pandemic is over? So it's interesting to see here sort of the changes that we've seen and what we might expect to see going forward. I should note that respondents could select all modes of transportation that they expected to use at least once a week. So we can see here that personal vehicle use is expected to go back to very close to pre-pandemic levels. And transit use, so that's for Metro Rail and for bus, we can see that that should return closer to pre-pandemic levels. What's really interesting here is to see that telecommuting levels, like the expectation on the part of respondents is that those levels will continue to be somewhat elevated relative to before the pandemic. Just to note the asterisk here at the bottom, about 5% of respondents did not know how they would commute or hadn't received the guidance from their employer at the time they took the survey. So let's dig into telecommuting a little more. All respondents who are currently telecommuting were asked about their choice to return to a work location after the pandemic. If given the choice, 2/3 said their preference would be to telework some days and commute to their work location some days. 1/4 wanted to telework full-time, that's the 26% here, and only 9% wanted to return to their work location full-time. Those who wanted to telecommute on some days were asked how many days they would ideally want to stay home. On the left here, or on the right, I'm sorry, you can see that that half wanted to telework 3 to 4 days and 41% wanted to telework for 2 days. So the big takeaway here is that we see that a majority of people currently teleworking would like to continue spending most of their time teleworking even after the pandemic. Let's move on to essential workers. So the survey asked, are you considered an essential worker who is required to travel outside your home for a job in the following industries? And then they could check all that applied here. We didn't define what essential worker meant beyond that. So 43% of respondents said yes, they self-reported as essential workers. Within that group, a plurality, or 43%, said they worked in government, and 1/3 described themselves having working in another field not listed. So here again, people could type in their response. So some of the industries we saw here were teaching, childcare, food service, construction, things like that. We looked at the commuting habits of essential workers on the next slide. And what we see is that they were much less likely to telecommute, but still about 1/3 were able to telecommute at least once per week. We had 2 short questions about online shopping habits, which is important because it can impact how people travel and also has implications for freight travel and parking. So here we can see that 70% of respondents say their online ordering has increased during the pandemic, with 39% saying it's increased a lot. 1 year after the pandemic is over, a majority, or 58%, say they expect their online shopping habits to continue as they currently are. Let's move on to the next section of the survey, which focused on ways to improve the regional transportation system. So all respondents were asked to select their top 3 preferred changes or improvements to various types of transportation infrastructure from a list of options, regardless of whether they used public transportation before or during the pandemic. And all questions presented the scenarios as occurring 1 year after the COVID pandemic is over. So first we asked about possible improvements to the bus stop or bus station. On the next slide, we'll look at the trip aboard the bus, but this question was specifically about the actual bus stop and while people were waiting for the bus. And results are shown here for both regular transit users and non-regular users. Regular transit users were defined as having used public transportation at least 3 times per week before the pandemic. So the top choice for all respondents was they wanted to have the bus stop display real-time bus information. Other popular choices were if the bus station provided shade or shelter from the elements. And we can see that the regular transit users, who are shown in red, they were significantly more likely to select those 2 options relative to the non-regular users. They were also significantly more likely to say they wanted adequate lighting at night. Not surprisingly, respondents who were not regular transit users were significantly more likely to say that no change to the bus stop or bus station would make them more likely to ride. And we'll see for this series, for almost all the questions, that about 40% said that no change or improvement would make them more likely to use that mode in question. So what about the trip aboard the bus? So here again, we see about 40% of respondents are saying no change would encourage their ridership. Non-transit users and older respondents above 65 were significantly more likely to select that option. The most popular option here was if buses arrived on a reliable schedule, followed by if buses traveled more quickly. And regular transit users, again, were significantly more likely to select those options. Let's move on to rail transit. Oops. And rail transit covered Metro Rail, commuter rail, and other trains. So in terms of possible improvements here, the most popular choice was for trains to come more frequently, followed by if trains were less crowded. Regular transit users were significantly more likely to select both of these again. And here, interestingly, only 1/4 of all respondents, or 26%, said that no change would make them more likely to take rail transit. So they're showing relatively more openness to using rail transit compared to bus. Next, we asked about improvements or changes that would make respondents more likely to walk, bike, or use an e-powered or device to get to transit. The most popular choice here was if there were sidewalks and safe crossings all the way there, followed by if my route to the train or bus was quicker or more direct. And here we broke the results by age group, and we can see that younger respondents were significantly more likely to select these options relative to seniors. The last question in the series asked about improvements that would make respondents more likely to use a bike. Here again, we show results by age group. And so we see that 42% say that no change, this is that little dot here, would make them make a difference really to them. But in terms of the more substantive choices, they're all related to bicycle infrastructure. So if bicycle lanes and routes were more direct and complete, was the top choice, followed by if bicycle lanes were separated from vehicles by a barrier. And older respondents were significantly more likely to say that no change would make them more likely to ride a bike. Let's move on to the next section, which is about these broad opinion questions that we asked. So this slide has quite a bit of information on it, but I'll walk you through it. So from left to right, the first question asked about support for continued use of street space and parking spaces for pedestrian access and restaurant seating 1 year after the pandemic is over. And we can see that 3/4 of respondents support this. Then next, we see that a majority of respondents supported more or wider sidewalks and bike lanes, even if it means a reduction in parking availability. In the red bar, we see a similar level of support for the creation of ride-hailing zones for pickup and drop-off on the street, even if it means a reduction in parking availability. Next, support for a dedicated bus lane to avoid congestion and make bus trips faster was higher at 71%. But when asked if they supported the removal of a lane of on-street parking to enable buses to travel in their own lane, the support for that measure dropped to 54%, but as you can see, it's still in the majority. Next, we looked at the topic of traffic congestion. So all respondents were asked how big of a concern traffic congestion is to them personally. As you can see, 44% of respondents, and that's this average number here, said that that traffic congestion was a significant concern that impacted their quality of life. So if we add together those who say that it's a significant concern and somewhat of a concern, taken together, that's 69% of respondents who say that congestion is a concern that impacts their quality of life. But as we can also see, the impact of congestion is felt differently based on region of residence. So those living further away from the core report a more negative impact of congestion. Let's move on to public opinion and views of climate change. So we asked two questions of respondents. The first was, how much do you agree or disagree that human actions contribute to at least some climate change? And the second was, how much do you agree or disagree that elected officials need to consider impacts of climate change when planning for transportation in the future? And as you can see from these charts, that agreement with these two statements was very high. The vast majority of the region's residents agree with both statements. Let's move on to driverless cars. So respondents were asked to select 3 ways the availability of driverless cars might benefit them or others in the region. The top 2 choices selected by 38% of respondents for each were better traffic flow and reduced congestion and not needing to park. We asked about perceived benefits here, and then we asked about possible concerns. So here again, respondents could select up to 3 options. Over half of respondents selected that the safety of pedestrians and bicyclists was a concern, and other top choices were safety of other drivers and liability for accidents. Next
Hey,
I'm sorry.
This is Charles. I just want to be aware of the time. It's almost 1:45, and we had another agenda item, and the meeting ends at 2.
Okay.
I would love to spend a much longer time on this. So what I was going to ask is if you could help maybe kind of wrap up a little bit of this, if there's some natural kind of conclusion pieces, and then because I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for some questions from our members.
Okay, sounds good. Yes, I'll just go to some key slides here. So next we asked about transportation equity. And we asked how well do you think the region's current transportation system meets your needs? So if we look on the right here, region-wide, 55% of people are saying that the system meets their needs, but it's again a very different response based on place of residence. So 1/4 of only 38% of people in the outer suburbs are saying the system meets their needs, relative to 75% of people in the core. So here again, we're just seeing a big difference based on region. I might skip the next few slides, which looks at the same question by various factors such as income and age. And I think I'll just move to the last section, which looks at an open-ended question that we asked all survey respondents, which was, what transportation investments should we make today that future generations will thank us for tomorrow? And here 95% of respondents provided an answer, which they typed in. And what we did is that we coded those answers using qualitative analysis techniques into primary and secondary themes, which you can see on the slide here. So the primary theme is the bubble, and that represents the general category or topic. And then the secondary themes are these bullets on the side, and that's sort of the actual wish list item that the respondent wants to see. So as you can see by looking at the bubbles, respondents were most concerned about roads, clean transportation, metro, light rail and trains, and public transportation. And within the broad roads category, we can see that they're interested in seeing more roads or more and wider lanes. And within clean transportation, there was a lot of interest in electric vehicles and in lower emissions. So I know there's sort of a lot here. We had 2,200 open-ended responses that we, organized into these categories. The last slide of the presentation just shows what the top secondary codes are, which means what the top sort of wish list items were out of all of the different open ends that were provided. And there is some verbatim quotes that I can leave on the screen if people want to read. And that's all. Thanks so much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Olivia. And I know that we could go through even more slides. I know this was already, I think, a pared down presentation from some of what was shared earlier too. So so much really great information here. And I know that I want to spend some time just looking through all of it. What I'm going to do, just so that folks know, we did have item number 10. We're going to skip that and just bump it to our March meeting. So sorry, Ariana. But I know there's going to be some questions and comments here, so I want to make sure we don't skip over that. And then because the last item, number 11, is just a very brief one, we'll make sure we hit that before we adjourn. I know I've got a bunch of questions in my head, but I want to reserve time for everybody. So let me first turn to, let's see, let me go to Virginia. Any questions from Virginia first?
Jeanette Rischel, Manassas Park. I have a question.
I will say just real fast for everybody, since we are tight on time, I'll just ask if we can make our questions and answers as tight as we can. Thank you.
Okay. Regarding the autonomous vehicle survey that you did, it appeared as though there was a significant percentage of folks who were concerned about, they were glad that there was no parking. Was that broken down further as to, would people be sending their vehicles home? Is that going to increase congestion? I mean, was that broken down further?
These were the answer options that they could select from. So it was basically, they could select not needing to park. And in the parentheses, it says a driverless vehicle can drop me off and park itself. So when people were selecting answers to this was a closed question kind of, so they could select from those options. And that was one of the ones they selected the most frequently. But we could certainly do further analysis by, region or other things in terms of who selected that option.
Concerned about people sending their vehicle, driving in their vehicles and then sending their vehicles home.
This was a benefit. This wasn't a concern. Okay. This was one of the possible benefits they could choose from.
I see. Thank you.
Sorry.
All right, thanks. Any other questions from Virginia?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is Supervisor West from Fairfax County. On the slide that talks about shared transportation investments, I kind of clued into the one little that talks about emerging technology. Did we have any specific information around what was described as emerging technologies?
Yes, we included e-scooters, e-bikes, drones, and we had some far-fetched things like flying cars as well.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
Thanks. We're all waiting for the flying cars. Anybody else from Virginia? All right, let me turn to Maryland real fast.
I have a question.
Yep.
If I recall the slide correctly, you noted that the vast majority of people who have been telecommuting more expected to be telecommuting or to return to driving or whatever in the pre-COVID patterns. But was there any sense, or was it being asked or thought about not just their intentions and what they might assume is the same general sort of operating environment versus expectations that their companies, their division of federal, local government, whatever they work, is making changes based on their experience? Because it seems that surprising that there are opportunities to work at home afterwards, given so much of what we're learning about accommodate more.
So you cut out a little. You cut out a little bit, but so this question asked about what do you expect, and here's where we have, a proportion of people who are currently telecommuting who may not be after the pandemic, but the level of telecommuting will still be higher than pre-pandemic. And again, this is just something that people might do once a week. And then this was different than the question that asked if they were given a choice. So this pie chart is more about preference. The preference is very strong to be telecommuting most of the time. These are people currently telecommuting. Whereas the previous slide is what they expect, with 5% still not knowing because they don't have guidance yet.
Which suggests if companies are making some changes based on this experience, that people are going to do it. So
yes, there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm for, at least amongst those who are doing it now.
Right. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Others from Maryland?
Yeah, this is Earl. One of the things that I'll mention in terms of one of the last slides regarding electric vehicles, for those who haven't seen it, American Council for a Clean Economy, energy efficient economy, recently came out with a report earlier this month that is basically a report card on states and districts' ability to actually take steps for transportation electrification. And California and New York were 1 and 2, as neighbors would probably know, but 3 and 4 were the District of Columbia and Maryland, and Virginia was in the top third. So obviously our jurisdictions and leadership know the importance of being aggressive in terms of steps to electrify transportation in terms of vehicles and its positive impact on climate change in terms of reducing emissions, as well as how it plays into other technological innovations in transportation, be they the emerging technologies or the ability of enhancing mobility for people that may have issues that don't give them the same access as others. So I think that's a positive for the region.
Yes, and I will note that, while some people just wrote electric vehicles, a lot of people understood that it needed sort of broader infrastructure. So this quote is actually kind of illustrative, how it says, invest heavily in infrastructure that supports electric vehicles, need more free public charging stations and dedicated EV parking spots, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot of that in the open-ended comments.
Yes, thank you.
This is
Thanks,
Katie from Tacoma Park. Two quick questions, and I don't necessarily need thorough answers right now, but I would love to follow up more on these. The first is I saw that you, in one of the later slides, I don't think you were able to show here, but was in the packet, that you had asked respondents demographic questions related to race and ethnicity. And I wondered if you had run any of the other answers based on race and ethnicity, if there were any findings that might be telling in terms of racial equity that we need to consider in terms of other responses that you saw here. And then my other question was how we, and this is more for Mr. Shrikant and TPB staff, how we can utilize this data as we look at things like the long-range plan and other actions that we as a board are taking.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
go ahead.
Conti.
Go ahead, Olivia.
I'll go after you. Okay. So for race ethnicity, yes, we gathered that as part of our big demographics section, and I should have that here. So this is the breakout. These are our demographics of the survey relative to the census. And we did do quite a bit of crosstabs by racial ethnic background. We didn't find a lot that was super compelling. One that comes to mind, I think, is that African Americans were more were somewhat more neutral about the climate change question or something, but they still supported it in like the 90% or something. So it just didn't feel like it was enough to kind of pull out and highlight, because even though we saw some slight differences, it wasn't like we saw with, for example, place of residence, which was really a driver for like the congestion question or something like that. Where we did see more differences was based on income status, where we saw, for example, and this might be a surprising finding if I go to it, in terms of the transportation system meeting needs, we actually saw that low-income respondents were slightly more satisfied with the transportation system relative to non-low-income respondents. And this may be surprising until you realize that the share of low-income, the weighted share of low-income respondents is lower in the outer suburbs, where we saw kind of the lowest level of satisfaction. So we're seeing more interesting differences by low income, I would say, rather than by racial ethnic background.
Thank you, Ms. Kostek. I was just going to add, one of the ways, the reason we did this survey was as all the member jurisdictions are making decisions on transportation priorities and their investments, give them a snapshot of what the expectations are, what the experiences are of our region's residents during the pandemic, and how that is informing their expectations for the future. We will be digging deeper into the analysis, and we'll make all of the results available to all of our member jurisdictions. Importantly, we conducted a focus group following up on this survey, which is more open-ended, and we were asking them to help go deeper into some of the answers we found here. So get those results also in the coming weeks.
Hi, Olivia. This is Councilmember Denny Taveras. Can I just ask a point of clarification?
Yes, of course.
I just want to make sure I understood you correctly. You said that lower income folks of lower income backgrounds were that were on the outside of the beltway were less satisfied than those on the inside of the beltway.
No, so this slide shows here in terms of does the transportation system, or how well does the transportation system meet your needs? We saw that low income respondents were less likely to rate the system as meeting their needs poorly. So this might be a surprising result until we look at the fact that the weighted share of low income respondents in the survey was less concentrated in the outer suburbs. So I just wanted to clarify.
We're less concentrated in the outer suburbs.
Right.
Okay. Thanks. All right, let me move to.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. If I may.
Yep.
Sorry,
all right.
Hand raised.
Go for it.
Thank you.
I can't see everybody.
Oh, okay. No worries. This is Patrick Wine, Mayor of College Park. And thank you for this information. This is a really great report. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about how this will be utilized, as Mr. Sukant just touched on. But but also the lessons learned. And I want to just echo what Ms. Kostek said about some of the racial, having some of the racial crosstabs, racial and ethnic crosstabs, and also if there's a crosstabs by level of income. Some of the challenges, I think digging into some of the challenges of where in particular there's more interest in greater access to walking and bicycling infrastructure would be really helpful. Also, I didn't see in here, and maybe I missed it, but in terms of increase in activity of walking and bicycling for non-transportation purposes, I wonder if that was something that you explored at all. And I'd be really interested in terms of access to that infrastructure, safe walking and bicycling infrastructure by level of income, if there was and by racial breakdown, if there were differences there.
When you mean non-transportation, do you mean like for exercise?
Yeah, for just people getting out, because with people working at home, looking for places, safe places to walk and bike, just to get outside for physical and mental health.
So we definitely asked sort of general travel, but we purposely didn't want to kind of make it about exercise. And I don't know, Karen and John, if you want to raise that issue, but I think, you know, when people are talking about walking more, they probably are including just going out and walking, maybe not to a specific destination, given the increases that we're seeing. But we didn't call out exercise or anything. We wanted to make it about general daily travel. And I made note of your interest in walking and biking infrastructure by race, ethnicity, and low income, and we can certainly note that in the report or have a crosstab about that.
Yeah, and along with that, I do also want to emphasize that, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, this is really step one of this public opinion research. We do, Kanti did mention this, we have the focus groups coming up. Now, 3 of the sessions, 2 of them were specifically done with participants that identify as racially or ethnically diverse, and another one was with participants that identified as low income, having a low income. So that we're getting more into in-depth discussions about issues like climate change, also bike infrastructure, and when it comes to safety as well. So we'll start getting that specific information as we move along with the analysis with that as well.
Thank you. Great. Thanks. I want to be aware of time. It's just a touch after 2 o'clock, and we're going to start losing people here in a second. Any questions from WMATA or other agencies?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll be super brief. Thank you for the information. I want to just be clear with the recipients of the info. There was a lot of customer desire for more frequent to be where we are delivering those things in spades. So we are cleaning our vehicles much more frequently. We are providing sufficient space on the system for social distancing and deploying real-time information both at the shelters and on mobile devices. So we are ready for you customers when you start going around again. Just want to make sure that this group takes a strategic perspective on this, because the fact of the matter is we're all really fortunate. We're working from home, teleworking. I didn't grow up that way. My family moved for this country. We ran laundromats, and we couldn't do that from home. And in this region, more than 50% of the region's workforce can't work from home. I don't want us to get distracted by mobile workforce when that's not going to do the job for 50% of this region's workforce. And I also want to make sure that we're concerned about non-work trips, which are 3/4 of the trips that this region executes. So it's great to look at the commute, but we have to be mindful of the fact that our problem in this region is non-work trips. And to bring this all the way back to Ms. Costiga's comment from earlier in the day, even if we electrified the entire national fleet, transit, passenger vehicles, light duty trucks, we would still need to reduce VMT by 25% to get to 2020 GHG levels. So let's not use this as an excuse to get distracted by shiny objects, flying cars included. Those are my thoughts today, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, one day, flying cars, right? But I hear you. I also really, one of the things I was gonna, just since we're out of time, I'm not going to go into it too much, but I definitely want to spend a little time kind of chewing through this and digesting a bit more as well, around the breakdown of essential versus non-essential. I know when we look at the workforce here in the District of Columbia, we have so many people that aren't in a position to telecommute and be able to pivot on a dime like so many people have been able to, but instead are essential workers and do not have a choice, and then are deeply impacted by everything with our WMATA system. I also, just reflecting, was struck, and I think I heard someone else bring this up, but the numbers on one of the slides, which showed relatively pre and post-pandemic similar rail and metro bus riderships, or at least plans of ridership, but then also seeing other barriers people identify. And I think even some metrics where they said they wouldn't be taking public transportation as much. So I know I want to kind of dig through that and digest it a bit more myself as well. And I think, Olivia, I heard you kind of also talk about that. Some of it could be related to both what people expect and what they hope. So that may be what we're seeing, some of that disparity there too. Otherwise, I don't know if there's anybody else from the district. I didn't want to speak for the entire District of Columbia. Is there anybody else from DC who wanted to say anything? All right. I'll say this. this is such wonderful information, meaty information. I know that a lot of us want to dig deeper into it, really digest it more, and probably come back with more questions and comments as well. So to Olivia, Karen, and the whole team, thank you very much for the presentation and for the hard work that went into it. And I will wager you can expect even more follow-up questions that come from this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, if he believes we can do it, I was going to make sure we get this notice item done because I think we've got to get this done, Conti and Lynn, which is the item number 11 on the agenda, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021. I think it'll be super fast, and then we will adjourn right after that if that works for folks.
Sure.
So let me turn to Nick.
Nick has a 1-minute question ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your packet today, there's a notice, and we do give some background information on the $590,000 that the region was allocated as part of the CRISA funding. And the purpose of the funding is to support those that are eligible under the Enhanced Mobility Program, and those recipients are going to be directed to prioritize on payroll and operational needs. The funding can also be used to transport individuals to and from vaccination sites. We did propose some eligibility criteria, and we do have on the very last page are some selection criteria that we submitted to the FTA. We did learn late yesterday that the FTA has concurred with that selection criteria, which is good news. So our next step is basically to streamline the solicitation and the application process. And our goal is to try and, we're basically going to try and get this out next week to our current grantees as well as any former grantees as part of all of our enhanced mobility. We've had some former JARC and New Freedom recipients as well that would be eligible. We will be back to this group, I would say probably in April for a concurrence on those projects that were selected. And we'll keep folks up to date on what's happening with that. But thank you.
Great, thank you, Nick. I'll just do a quick open call. Any burning questions for Nick on this item before we adjourn?
Yes, Chairman Allen. This is Terry Donald, Prince George's County.
Hey, Terry.
With those funds, can you use it to pay for taxi trips to the vaccination center for those here in the suburb of Maryland?
Yeah, as long as you're transporting individuals to and from those vaccination sites, yeah. And if it's a grantee that we've dealt with in the past, because we want to make sure that everyone's federally compliant, yeah, that'll work. Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
All right, excellent. Thank you. All right, Nick, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Sure.
All right, everybody. Thank you for your patience. I think it was well worth going over by a couple of minutes, given the depth of that presentation. And I encourage anybody, Conti, I think we all have it electronically. Maybe it would actually be good to refresh it in everyone's inbox. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, if someone could send it around to staff again, because I have a hunch interest will be piqued again after that great presentation and the discussion. So
Will do. Thanks.
Thanks, Conti. All right, well, with that, I appreciate everyone. We're going to adjourn. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 17th, 2021. And I promise, Ariana, we will have the priority airport grounds access projects on the agenda there. We'll have it early in the agenda so we don't bump it if we run a little bit long. But thanks, everybody. Hope you all stay safe. I know we've got a little bit of weather coming our way. So stay safe, be well, and look forward to seeing everybody again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Good job, Leo. Woohoo! You made it. How does it feel?
Thanks. It was good. No problems.
Yeah, no problems, because it didn't look like there were any problems.
Yeah, everything went fine.
Yes, Leo did a good job with the Lynn circus between PowerPoint and tables. She was testing you, Leo.
I was testing you, guys.
Yeah.
You passed.
Thank you.
Thank you all for covering a whole lot of ground in 2 hours.
Thank you all. Sorry that the time